Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today as we at SafeReach proudly present Building Digital Operational Resilience in the DORA Era. I'm Tova Dvorin. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at SafeReach, and I'll be your host for today's presentation. Let's go. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Adrian Cully is Senior Sales Engineer for SafeReach, and he's the brains behind understanding the EU market in regards to adversarial exposure validation. And he's our resident DORA subject matter expert. Adrian, we're so glad you're here today. And Adrian is joined today by David Murray. He's our UK Regional Sales Director at SafeReach. And David has been instrumental in gathering additional insights from real EU prospects and customers about cyber regulations as they are developing and their implications for businesses in real terms and in real time. So we're super excited to start this discussion. I'll just quickly go through a few housekeeping items. First of all, ask as many questions as you want. We will answer as many questions as we can throughout this presentation. We have a section at the end. To ask a question, there's a designated Q&A functionality, or you can drop it in the chat. If you're interested in a more detailed demonstration and conversation about what we talk about today, we encourage you to visit us at www.safereach.com to learn more and schedule a formal demo. But without further ado, let's go to Adrian.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us, myself and David. The clue's in the name. We're going to chat about the Digital Operational Resilience Act. The key word there is resilience, closely followed by digital. It started back in 2022 as an EU regulation. It's regulation number 2554. Those of you who aren't familiar with how the law works in the EU, you've got member states which are sovereign. The EU as a body issues directives, regulations. They're then a time period is given, and basically what's now the Digital Operational Resilience Act in each country's sovereign law in the EU came into force on the 17th of January this year. It affects finance, insurance, banking, and the other firms. We'll go into that in a moment, at the telecoms that support them. But why does it matter? Well, again, we'll be pulling that apart. There's some really sound cybersecurity principles in this act that are actually now being echoed around the world, and we'll cover off where we're seeing this being enacted in law elsewhere. And what does it mean for you in terms of, why should you comply? What do you need to do? We'll be covering that off as well. Just to highlight that whilst we're talking about legislation, we aren't lawyers, we're not pretending to be lawyers, and this doesn't constitute legal advice. Obviously, for legal advice, see a lawyer. Okay, so I touched on this very briefly already. The reality is the Digital Operation Resilience Act, DORA, we've anthropomorphized her here, is redefining the regulatory landscape around the world. We're already seeing follow-on legislation, the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill going through the UK Parliament, the Protection of Critical Infrastructures, Computer Systems Ordinance in Hong Kong, just passed in Japan last week through the Japanese Diet, their Parliament, is the Active Cyber Defence Act. All of them are embracing many of the sound principles that are in DORA. Now, second to that, we also have the issue that even if you're not in the EU, you may well find that you need to comply with DORA, very akin to GDPR. But before we get to that, I mentioned the key word at the start is resilience. I think it's useful to define resilience. Why? Well, it's dominating not just the world of government and business and cybersecurity at the moment, but everything. It's the new apex and pinnacle of cybersecurity for certain. And we're seeing it being embodied into legislation around the world. So I think it's useful. There are a number of slightly differently worded definitions in different dictionaries, but we'll stick with the Oxford English Dictionary for today. And you'll note that there are two levels to the meaning of resilience. It is both the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, i.e. adversity, but also toughness, strength against adversity. So there are two elements to resilience, and I think it's really important to remember that when we then pull apart what does the act mean, and as we just discussed, why should we be embracing this? So I mentioned it may affect you even if you're not in the EU. It does affect EU financial entities, banks and insurance. And the Act refers to ICT, Information Communication Technology, which is a long-winded way of saying telecommunications firms. There are some exceptions, very, very small financial firms, into business financial firms, such as specialist brokers between other brokers, for example. But as I alluded to before, even if it legally doesn't affect you, it is worth paying attention to DORA because it contains some very interesting, very sound principles that are actually being driven by the evolution of cybersecurity. We couldn't have had the Digital Operational Resilience Act 10 years ago because the cybersecurity in general wasn't mature enough. The Act is a side effect of cybersecurity maturity. And as I mentioned, we're actually seeing quite a fast pace. The Act's been mirrored in other jurisdictions around the world outside of Europe because it's worth subscribing to because of all of the benefits from complying. So, massive topic which we'll be pulling apart over the coming years. How do I reach cyber resilience? The heart of this is, for a long time, arguably 40 years, it was acceptable that you put in place cybersecurity controls and that you allowed those vendors to mark their own homework, basically. Tell you that it was configured correctly and tell you that it was functioning correctly. The challenge in that is those of you who've unfortunately been breached or have experience of hostile threat actor activities will know that any credible attack on your enterprise, the first thing a skilled threat actor does is disable your security controls. So it's important that we get to a point where, first and foremost, we're able to identify that our security controls are actually functioning correctly. And a key part of that is that they haven't been disabled or circumvented. And secondly, that we're not just trusting the controls themselves to mark their own homework, but how do we validate that those controls are defending us against the latest attacks? So I mentioned there's some very important principles in DORA. A key part that runs through several of the articles, Tova's very nicely pulled these into a table for us here. There are 5 particular articles that touch upon the word continuous, and it's very interesting. That's been reflected in the legislation around the world. DORA mandates that you undertake continuous activity, but doesn't actually define what continuous means. I think we can all agree that that doesn't mean tick box compliance and once every 3 years. In fact, it's very clear on a close reading of DORA, it's absolutely constructed to deflate and avoid tick box compliance, with the single exception of it does mandate that you get a independent third party to undertake penetration testing a minimum of every 3 years. However, sections 6, 9, 10, 13 and 16 basically across them bring in the principle of continuous testing. And the safe breach view of this also requires, you'll hear me talking later on and a lot about automatic is not congruent with continuous. They're 2 different things. You can have both at the same time, but our take of what is continuous, it's not just an activity that doesn't stop. It requires also continuous threat intelligence, continuous adversary emulation, continuous updating of attack techniques, and continuous tracking of what we call the delta and the drift, which is, okay, we've just validated our security controls, but we ran the same testing 7 days ago, 14 days ago, 28 days ago, 6 months ago. How has that changed over time? Now, why does DORA ask for continuous, and why is that important? Well, again, back to how cybersecurity has matured and evolved, and what was acceptable practice over the past 40 years has now changed. People for a long time talked about corporate cyber security posture as if it was a fixed thing, as if it was a statue. And the reality is, and unfortunately it's something that adversaries seek to take advantage of, your cybersecurity posture is continually shifting. It's fluid and dynamic. So one of the key reasons why continuous is required is it's no good testing every 3 years and saying we were great. you actually need to test continuously because your cybersecurity posture is continuously shifting. Equally, because that's continuously shifting, adversaries are continuously probing and undertaking the early parts of the kill chain and preparing for attacks, if not actually in full-blown attack mode. So it's very sensible that we undertake continuous testing. If we move forward to the next slide. Oops, we've gone back there.
Oh, sorry about that. There we go.
So the other really interesting thing in terms of deflating tick box compliance is that DORA requires this to be undertaken in production, specifically critical live production systems. Now, Safe Breach have a huge advantage here. We've been around 11 years. We were founders in this space of breach attack simulation and adversary emulation, cyber threat exposure management. We are very strong in the entities who have to comply with DORA. We've got a very strong customer base there, and we have the advantage of many of them have been using our platform to test critical live production systems. Now, why does DORA require this? Well, some financial entities in the past achieved tick box by compliance by buying security solutions. Data loss prevention famously springs to mind. Having a license, applying them in a lab, but never ever putting them into production. DORA mandates that you now must do this with critical live production systems. The question then comes, how do we do this safely? How do we do this without business disruption? And how do we do this to demonstrate that we're complying with DORA? Now, why have they mandated this above and beyond avoiding tick box compliance? Well, guess what? Attackers don't attack your lab systems. The attackers are attacking critical live in production systems. It makes absolute solid, sound common sense that we should be validating our security controls and emulating adversary attacks, simulating adversary activity. We'll talk later on about the differentiation between simulation and emulation, to make sure that we've got the strongest security posture possible and we're maintaining that. And all of these articles, all of these elements are required for compliance with the Digital Operational Resilience Act. Now, we are seeing around the world a number of CISOs including resilience in their job titles. We're actually seeing also the emergence of chief resilience officers. Now, there's a broader aspect to that, which is the business resilience elements that are seen as very desirable by audit committees, external auditors and shareholders and boards. But obviously, DORA is specifically aimed at the cybersecurity elements of this. Okay, we move on. So, what does this mean day to day? And we'll go through some steps here and actually show you what continuous ongoing DORA compliance looks like before we wrap up today.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing this in practice.
Okay, so this is within our platform. I mentioned the delta and the drift earlier. This is a dashboard that's aimed at chief officers, and it's tracking for us based on a traffic light basis. When we validate tools, what attacks have been missed, what attacks have been logged but allowed to continue, and the green is what attacks have been stopped, stroke prevented. We can see over time how our security posture has shifted. We can see whether we're increasing or decreasing. And the point here is to 1,000,000 miles away from tick box compliance and every 3 years penetration testing, we're moving now to a environment where we're continually testing these security controls and tools. We're continually checking, as our security posture dropped, where are we? How does that look? There's a lot more detail to this if we move to the next part. We can see here an overview of exactly which attacks have succeeded at what part of the kill chain. Where are we with across the kill chain, where should I prioritize my response? You know, very few people have got huge red, blue, purple SOC teams. This allows you to take a limited, expensive resource, and the idea is in not only achieving DORA compliance, um, the Safe Breach platform, Safe Breach as your partner, we're taking on as much heavy lifting on your behalf as we can to free up your valuable human resources to do the difficult things. But human remains a key element. And the bridge for us between automation and continuous is augmentation, which is where we upskill all of our human assets to be able to deliver this in a way that's at the moment difficult for anything that's pure AI, pure automation for to embrace. Here we can see within the same compliance, this is just scrolling down the screen, we can see which threat groups are active against us. Obviously, these high red columns, it's a representative example, but there's some things here that should be very concerning. If I look across my data estate at the bottom, I can see I've got a preponderance of attacks being missed at the endpoint, which needs addressing. And the idea here is we don't just simulate this attack, emulate the adversary, and show you that we've been successful. We drive all the way through to actually generating updates and patches for your security controls to allow you to quickly and smoothly, via integration or manually and directly, repair the hole. And the whole point back to DORA's mandating continuous testing: we validate, we remediate, we repeat. We go round the circle again. Now, there are a number of different ways that we can emulate and simulate. There are some tests that you'd want to do on a daily basis. There are some on a weekly, monthly basis. There are some that you will do because there's a new risk has emerged, such as the updated Russian GRU attacks from CISA last Thursday, and the sticky werewolf Llama C2, Luma Stealer attacks. Being able to incorporate those into our continuous testing as quickly as possible and in a timely manner are very desirable as well. And what we're doing is we're just constantly tracking the drift and the delta and making sure that there is no such thing as 100% security, but our security is as thorough and rigorous as is possible to deliver. And that's a key part of achieving resilience.
So what are some of the key takeaways? We just discussed a lot of different topics. What if someone would want to walk away with 2 to 3 data points about what we've discussed today, what would you tell them?
So first of all, if I think we've got a nice slide to represent this. I did talk about it earlier. A tool that's going to be useful for you, a bit like a screwdriver can do all sorts of good and all sorts of harm, and is useful for lots of things. I think this is a useful tool as we move into a world where there's far higher prevalence of artificial intelligence uh, with lots of benefits. But here's a key thing to pull apart a lot of marketing that's out there in the marketplace at the moment. Continuous is not congruent with automatic. Automatic is not congruent with continuous. That there's a lot of chatter out there talking about these two things as if they're synonyms, if they're just alternate terms, and they're not. Don't take my word for it. Look up the definitions. Automatic implies unthinking, iterative, recursive, repetition. Continuous implies a human element and a smart element. We're taking feedback, we're adapting, we're evolving. It's possible to have both together, but you can't just conflate both words. I'm confident you will find that a useful tool as part of your due diligence and rigorous critical questioning of any AI-based solution. Continuous and automatic are two different things, and that's really helpful in terms of DORA compliance. Just because you automate something doesn't make it continuous, and DORA requires continuous, not necessarily automatic. There's nothing wrong with automatic, it can be very healthy, but it's not going to get us on its own to DORA compliance. We stress this at the start. Resilience is key. The Where we're going to go with this, so there's 3 parts to DORA. There was the directive moving over the last 2 years into law. We've now got this being embraced, and companies, audit committees, external auditors, shareholders around the world, because I mentioned it's akin to GDPR, by the way. Just because you're not in the EU, if you trade with any of these bodies, for example, you're in America, South America, Asia Pacific, and you trade with a European financial entity, just like GDPR, you need to be compliant too. And you can be fined for not, and the fines are immense. So resilience is key, both to DORA compliance, but also to this is actually useful regulation, not cumbersome regulation, not inconvenient regulation. The whole drive behind DORA is becoming cyber secure, is achieving advantage over the adversary. That's why we want informed, smart adversary emulation. It boils down to, for want of a better phrase, hack yourself before somebody else does. And that's absolutely what we deliver, but in a safe manner, which is why we're successfully doing it with existing clients already against critical live production assets. And this is what we're striving for. Now, I mentioned again, we've talked about continuous and automation not being congruent. Simulation and emulation, there's often some confusion. Emulation is actually a focused subset of simulation. I like to use the analogy of a boxer, the Rocky movies, for example. Simulation is the general gym and your trainer and your coach. It's all of the weight machines, skipping, running, all of that general activity to raise your fitness level and improve your posture, your health, your fitness. That's simulation. In boxing, though, when boxers are preparing for a prize fight, open secret, they will generally find a sparring partner who is rotated and changes, who is a very close match for their upcoming fight and for their upcoming opponent. So emulation is a very focused form of simulation. And in emulation, in our world, it's adversary emulation, cyber adversary emulation, threat actor emulation. We're trying to directly replicate what the adversary is going to do, the adversary's activity. Of course, again, we do that, clues in the name as always, in a safe manner. But simulation is general cybersecurity posture, is our cyber health across the board. Emulation is repeating, replicating very specific attacks. And we need to undertake both of those knowingly, and again, be tracking and monitoring the results and on a continuous basis, and shifting our emulation to match the latest known attacks. Now,
Let's,
my
here you go, Adrian.
please, Tove, no, please.
David, you are somewhat famous around here for your analogy of the digital canary in the coal mine and how SafeBreach does that, especially when it comes to the context of DORA. Could you explain to us a little bit about this, what the analogy is and how you apply it?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about it, right, in the early days of mining, canaries were used as early warning systems detecting toxic gases before humans could. So similarly, in today's digital landscape, automated breach simulation, continuous threat validation act as the modern day canaries, right? So it's the digital canary in the coal mine. It helps organizations detect vulnerabilities and operational weaknesses before real attacks strike. So one question we always get asked is, how do you apply this to DORA? Well, as Adrian mentioned, DORA mandates resilience, not just defense. It's about knowing how your systems behave under attack, not just having them protected. When we think about safe breach as a digital canary, well, the platform itself simulates real-world attacks across the infrastructure, identifying exposures before they're exploited. So this aligns perfectly with the expectations around advanced testing, risk management, and threat-led penetration testing.
So we have the luxury, having been at this some time, of this actually occurring on a daily basis on critical live production systems with real customers. I believe there's an example with a pharmaceutical company just a couple of weeks ago, David.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the digital canary and the firewall fiasco. So the punchline to this is, why did our security posture drop 90% overnight? So it was just another Wednesday morning for this organization, and everything seemed quiet until the Safe Breach dashboard lit up with alerts. Something had triggered a massive drop of 90% on their resilience scores. Now, the team were able to trace this back, and on a Wednesday, the firewall rule set had been updated as part of the scheduled change window, but there was a misconfiguration. Now, SafeBreach detected it, but there was no alarms, no alerts. Traditional monitoring tools didn't catch anything at all.
So just to stress, similar to how a skilled advanced adversary will disable your tools, the question for everybody is, what digital canaries do you have to detect that you've got an attack underway, to detect that tools have been disabled, tools have been circumvented, or even misconfigured, as was the case here? And it's a hard question. We can provide an answer as to what our customers use our platform for, but if you're not already a customer, how are you achieving the digital canary effect? And how would you, the whole point of the canary is it saves the miner's life. How would you detect a hostile attack as early as possible to keep your business in production, unlike what's happened to some retail businesses in the UK recently?
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. Let's move over to Q&A. I think we discussed a lot of really interesting topics. Let's see what the public has to say. By the way, if you still have questions, you can still type them in the Q&A widget module that's in the webinar panel. But in the meantime, we have a few here. Okay, here's a good one. So how frequently should organizations perform simulations to be compliant with DORA? Is there a certain pace?
So as I mentioned, that's a great question. Isn't it interesting? Just to re-stress this point, DORA requires continuous across all those articles. However, it doesn't define continuous. I think we would all agree that it's absolutely not once every 3 years. Our view is continuous means a scheduled rolling program that is ongoing, and that we're actually undertaking a range of testing as often as we can, and we harness the automation part to actually have something doing the heavy lifting and delivering this as far as we can 24/7 365. Why do we want to achieve 24/7 365? Because that's how the attackers are already operating. Attackers are already harnessing AI based tools to deliver continual attacking. We must be tracking our security posture and validating our security posture continuously too. That's exactly why that's been written into DORA.
Right. And, I actually was speaking to someone who had worked as a sales engineer in the pen testing circuit the other day, and he was saying that there are vendors out there who will say it's continuous, but there's actually a great deal of setup involved, and it could be once every few weeks. When we speak continuous, we're saying continuous, right? To be always scanning, to be always looking, to be on the lookout, and to have people behind you to back you up.
We are saying that, and also bear in mind this is it's not only continuous, it's offensive cybersecurity. Be very careful about who's providing that for you. We have quite rightly we have a number of customers who do this in an air gapped. Everything's kept as secure as possible. Do ask questions of your provider. Do ask questions of the individual. Legacy penetration testing is now very limited. It will always have a place, but it's limited. Why is it limited? Well, we're emulating an adversary via a scenario that replicates all of the known attacks, mapped to the MITRE attack framework that we can align to that threat actor. It is hard for any individual penetration testing person to deliver all of that as a person. And the reality is, legacy penetration testing remains largely manual, even if they're using the word automatic, and you're not really testing against a simulation or emulation of that adversary. You're testing against the skill level of that individual who delivers on the contract, and DORA clearly requires far more than that. And it is possible to achieve a scheduled program going forward that's continuous in the fullest sense. What we will find out, I mentioned that we've got the laws come into place. We've now got it being embraced by companies. The third part of that we're going to see into 2026, which is enforcement action for non-compliance. There are very large fines potential. How the non-compliance enforcement is going to go, we won't know until we get there. But we will see a shift in attention to DORA as we go into 2026.
Right, that makes sense, especially with all the different regulations coming out now in DORA's footsteps. I mean, and going back to DORA for a second, what types of threat simulations are considered the most relevant for DORA compliance? Is there a subset that people should be focusing on over others?
That's again a great question. Because DORA's aimed at the financial entities of Europe, and the telecoms firms who support them, I'd strongly recommend that you look at emulations that are based on threat actors that we know are active against finance, and threat actors that we know are active against telecoms, including APT28, APT29, Fin6, Fin7, Sandworm. All of these are threat actors, amongst many others, but I suggest those are priorities. Scattered Spider, again, I would suggest as a priority. But it's important that you work with, if you don't have this resource in-house, our customer success team with threat intelligence specialists, which we provide as well, to make sure that you're actually emulating the adversaries most relevant to your industry. And we can help you largely with that, but we also shift and adjust to that as that emerges. As I mentioned, we have a service level agreement with the US CISA and the Five Eyes intelligence community. The two latest actionable alerts were the Russian GRU Unit 26165 attacks on Thursday and the Sticky Werewolf. And they're now available within 24 hours of being published as attack code that you can use for emulating those threat actors and being able to report back to your board. Actually, there is a new known attack. We've emulated the attack. We've remediated our gaps, and we know how that affects our cybersecurity posture. That was impossible 10 years ago. That is currently the pinnacle and apex of cybersecurity. And we're seeing more and more boards, more and more audit committees, more and more shareholders saying that's what we want to see delivered. I mentioned we're seeing, DORA is changing the regulatory landscape around the world. We're seeing it being embraced in different legislations. I think this is only going to tighten up and become more widespread. And the driver behind that, why are people embracing DORA around the world? It's because it contains very sound principles for cybersecurity.
Yeah, and one of those is, of course, testing in your production environments. And we spoke a lot about that, but how do we ensure, at least how does SafeReach ensure that the simulations don't affect your in-production environments? How do we make it safe to breach yourself?
So that's, again, a great question, Tova. The clue's in the name. Whilst we're emulating the attack, I like to say what we do is, there's an old English idiom about we don't let children play with matches. Not that I'm calling anybody children, but we actually do allow children to play with matches, but we make sure they're damp matches that aren't going to light anything or explode. And we do that by neutering the attacks. We take you as far as possible through the actual attack that we know of, but we don't do anything that's going to detonate, and we don't do anything that's going to disrupt live production. So our research and development labs have actually neutered the attacks to make sure that they're safe. And just to stress as well, we're very strong on our research and development. We actually originate exploits as well as safe breach. The most recent high-level example of that was the Microsoft LDAP nightmare attack, published on the 1st of January this year. Again, don't believe me, Google it. That actually didn't originate from Microsoft or anybody else. It originated from SafeBreach as an exploit. We don't sell exploits. We're not in the spying game. When we write a new exploit, we go to the appropriate vendor. We fully inform them. We do provide coverage for our customers, but we don't then publicize it to anybody else except our partner base until the vendor's got a patch for it and is launching the patch. But that's a key issue as well. That's part of, we're always at the cutting edge of attacks, But because we write attacks, we also know how to neuter attacks and how to deliver that attack in a way that allows it to be done on critical live production assets. A really important part of DORA, and requires a key sea change in behaviour to how financial entities have approached cybersecurity in the past. And we empower and enable you to do this absolutely safely. We also give you very fine control, which we're happy to demonstrate to people if anybody wants to see this walkthrough outside of today's session. In terms of the actual launching the attack on the asset, we give you what we refer to it as advanced options. We give you very fine control over the advanced elements of each attack. If you want to take it back into the lab, we can make the attacks more dangerous. So things like kernel injection, for example, we can do, but we recommend that you do that on a machine that it doesn't matter if it disrupts the machine. So we can go to a full-blooded, as savage as possible attack, but we allow you and we encourage you to do it in a neutered manner, like damp matches, for when we're doing this on critical live production systems. And we have many customers that are doing that every day of the week.
I think it's also important to know that we're experts at cleanup as well. If we're going to run a test on a critical live production systems, we make sure that that system is cleaner than when you found it.
Oh, absolutely. Removal of artifacts, and that's a great point, Tova, just to mention, why are we very popular with red, blue, and purple teams? Well, we give you control over that as well. We do cleanup. You can set auto cleanup, but you can also tell the cleanup to pause. And I like to say to people all the time, we don't really have customers, we have partners. Why do we have partners? Because we're really in the game of knowledge transfer. You're all very good at what you do. We're very good at what we do, but we're always transferring the latest cutting edge knowledge that we have to our partners, and we're empowering and enabling red team and blue team training. And this allows you to emulate an attack and either notify the blue team that you've done so or do it without notice. But either way, at the end of the emulation, then trigger your blue team to say, what can you find? And it's skilling everybody up all the time, continually, because that's how attackers are working. They're constantly looking for new exploits, new loopholes, new ways to get into the organization. Um, and we really empower you to raise your skill level by giving you full control over the emulation and the simulation, and absolutely reaping the most benefit of having delivered this.
Thanks, Adrian. I mean, going back to red teaming for a second, and also knowing that most companies don't have huge red, blue, purple teams. Is there, and if so, what are the differences between red teaming and continuous security validation in the context of DORA?
Um, so it's interesting. David and I are obviously exposed to a lot of banking CISOs, a lot of banking red and blue teams, and over the last 3 months, DORA has been a common denominator of all of our conversations. And we're very aware that I keep mentioning for people who aren't overly familiar with how businesses are structured, whether they're privately held or publicly listed, but most businesses have a internal audit team, they have a board, they have a CEO, they may or may not have shareholders, they may also have an external audit team. All of these people are paying very close attention to DORA compliance, and for a range of reasons. It's not only the fines, which are significant, they can be up to 10% of your turnover, but it's also, as I've said several times, there are very sound principles and ideas within DORA that are actually common sense for making yourself more resilient. The clue's in the name again. And why would you not do that? So I can confirm that every day of the week now, it's unusual to have us to have any engagement and any conversation where it doesn't swing around, feature around DORA compliance.
And what would you say to anyone who says that DORA hasn't reached areas outside of the EU yet, particularly in North America? How long do they have where they need to cotton on?
We're aware of some of that chatter. The reality is it has already reached, just like GDPR. If anybody's out there outside of the EU and you remember your GDPR journey, it's already there, that you already legally have to comply. If you don't take the easy steps available today, I'd hate for you to be in the position of the first you know about complying is regulator activity in 2026 and approaching this via a very large fine. We're seeing events around the world. There will be enforcement. There's no two ways about this. We've seen several $100 million fines around GDPR in the EU in the last few weeks. We are going to see DORA compliance. There's no two ways about it in terms of fines. So it is coming wherever you are. If you are a North American financial entity, if you're a North American telecoms entity trading with Europe, you have to comply, just like GDPR. It is not an option. And best to be on the front foot.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Well, we have gone through all our questions. These were great questions. Thank you. This is a lovely audience. And we're running out of time, so I'm just going to wrap this up. Thank you so much, Adrian and Dave, for being here and talking to us about DORA. I know that we've just scratched the surface a bit. We'll be bringing you much more content on DORA in the coming months. We'll keep you informed, everybody. And thank you for being here. We covered a lot of ground today, so if you want to review, we have you covered. We'll be sending you a recording of this session after we wrap up, and we might also send links as well to some of our other DORA assets. We have a white paper out. We have some blogs coming so that we can just keep you informed about what's going on with EU cyber regulation. It's coming, and it's a big wave. In case you want to share with others in your network, go for it. You'll have the link at your disposal. And in the meantime, we can't wait to see you at our next webinar. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your workday.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.